Twitter Files 4 dropped. Came in from our friend Michael Schellenberger. He's on Twitter at SchellenbergerMD. And this was a doozy. This was about pressure being placed within Twitter on a bunch of executives to get rid, of course, of Donald Trump. And so we're going to go into the full Twitter files. You can see Michael Schellenberger dropped these on us on December 10th. Twitter Files, Part 4, the removal of Donald Trump, January 7th. And we've gone through this because previously we had drops from others who were walking us through the days leading up to January 6th. Remember, January 6th was sort of that pivotal moment in our country where we saw everything change. So he tells us the removal of Donald Trump as the pressure builds. Twitter executives build the case for a permanent ban. They've been chomping at the bit for this. They really, really wanted this to happen a long time ago, but finally it's coming to fruition. On January 7th, senior Twitter executives, they create justifications to ban Trump, couldn't come up with a reason, so they created them. They seek a change of policy for Trump alone, so they single him out, distinct from other political leaders. As we've said, other dictators around the world are putting people in slave camps, and they have their own little Twitter entourage that nobody looks at all. Also expressing no concern for the free speech or the implications for democracy, of course. And the Twitter Files here today is reported with this fella, also Leighton Woodhouse. And so make sure you're giving him a follow as well, at L Woodhouse. Now, Schellenberger gives us a little bit of a recap to help refresh our recollection on some of this stuff. He says, for those catching up, by the way, part 1, we've already covered here on this channel, where Matt Taibbi documents how senior Twitter executives violated their own policies to prevent the spread of accurate information. Covered all of that. That was back December 2nd. We also had part 2. Barry Weiss on December 8th told us how senior Twitter executives, people like Vijay Agadi and Yoel Roth and others, Jim Baker, if you recall, were all there talking about blacklists and de-amplifying disfavored Twitter users, not just specific tweets. And we also covered back then, libs of TikTok and James Woods and many others who all got censored by Twitter. They were put on these blacklists. Part 3, Matt Taibbi, we covered this last week, documents how senior Twitter executives censored tweets by Trump in the run-up to the election. Very important conversation being had in October, November, but censored tweets came out from Twitter. Regularly engaged with representatives of the U.S. government and law enforcement agencies. Okay, we saw that. We've talked a lot about that here on this channel, about Elvis Chan representing the FBI, colluding with the big tech companies in Silicon Valley, flying out there to literally have meetings with them on a weekly basis, sitting with Yoel Roth on a weekly basis to have conversations about all of this. Now, for years, Twitter had resisted calls to ban Trump. They posted this back on January 5th, 2018. The Twitter public policy page, they posted this. Okay, a couple years before they actually nuked Trump, they said, blocking a world leader from Twitter or removing their controversial tweets would hide important information people should be able to see and debate. Obviously, right? When they nuked Trump, yeah, okay, it was a benefit for them because they nuked Trump and he didn't get to communicate with his people anymore. But there were millions of people in this country and around the world who wanted to hear from him. So they were also taking that away from the people. They got it in 2018. They said it would also not silence that leader, but it would certainly hamper necessary discussion around their words and actions. They talked about that previously, but they threw that right in the garbage. But after the events of January 6th, the internal and external pressure on Twitter and the CEO, Jack Dorsey, grows. The former First Lady, Michelle Obama, a tech journalist named Kara Swisher, the Anti-Defamation League high-tech venture capitalist named Chris Sacca, and many others called on Twitter to ban Trump. They were freaking out about it. They said he needed to go. Now, here's what they said. Chris Sacca, who's a venture capitalist, he's a billionaire, I believe he lives in Wyoming, says, "You've got blood on your hands, Jack and Zuck. For 4 years, you've rationalized this terror. Inciting treason, violent treason, is not a free speech exercise. If you work at those companies, it's on you too. Shut it down." Right? So they wanted Trump removed. Chris Sacca, I've listened to interviews from him. He's a interesting fella, but he wants him gone. Now, he joined the chorus along with others. You can see this one came out from Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama posted this one, January 7, 2021. You can see the date up in the upper right hand. 12:49 p.m. She writes this big paragraph, this big woe is me, seeing the gulf between the responses to yesterday's riot and this summer's peaceful protest and the larger movement for racial justice is so painful. It hurts, she said. The highlighted part, we'll just skip all the rest of Michelle. She says, now is the time for Silicon Valley companies to stop enabling this monstrous behavior and to go even further than they already have by permanently banning this man from their platforms and putting in place policies to prevent their technology from being used by the nation's leaders to fuel insurrection. Very upset about it. All right, very upset. Continues on. Even in the darkness, there are glimmers of hope. Everybody was doing this. Absolute meltdown, theatrics. It was almost like they were all auditioning for a show. Probably all laughing at each other. I wonder if who can write the most ridiculous statement. Of course, Michelle Obama is up there. Kara Swisher is another one. She was joining in. This article came out presumably right around the same time. Don't see a time on it. But said it's time for social media platforms to permanently ban Trump. Donald Trump finally unleashed the Kraken yesterday, although it had little to do with electoral fraud. Instead, everything to do with creating frightening chaos and swallowing up enemies whole. Gosh, so dramatic. All right, so that's from Kara Swisher. And look at this monster. Look at this picture. What a psycho picture to put on there. Does she really think that's what happened at the Capitol? Okay. Well, so she's not alone. Jonathan Greenblatt over from the ADL says, 2 bare minimum tweets after the Capitol has been stormed by extremists is too little too late, Jack. It's overdue to suspend Donald Trump until his account stops promoting violence, stops inciting violence and spreading disinformation. And then they actually posted a whole statement about this, right? They dropped that one on January 6th. ADL statement on violence. Everybody was spring loaded. It was almost like they were sort of wanting this to happen because they had a whole plan in place in order, they knew what to do after it happened. As soon as Donald Trump sort of stepped in it, right? Maybe because they put it right there in front of him. Then they get to respond, and the response is worse than the actual incident, right? So we can see that Schellenberger continues for us. He tells us, Dorsey, Jack, was on vacation, typical, in the French Polynesia in the week from January 4th to January 8th, very conveniently. He phoned into meetings, but he also delegated much of the handling to the situation to senior executives, people named Yoel. Twitter's global head of trust and safety, also Vijaya. We've talked about these two people many times. They're on the thumbnail on the show today because they're probably the most responsible for this horrific censorship in America. But as context, Schellenberger tells us, it's important to understand that Twitter's staff and senior executives were overwhelmingly progressive. All knew this. 2018, 2020, 2022, 96, 98, 99% of Twitter's staff went to Democrats. Donations, all to the Democrats. 99%. Right. So for these people who scream about diversity and intellectual fluidity so that we can have all sorts of people represented, they basically live in an echo chamber, don't they? It's all their friends and it's all their people and they all donate to the Democrats. So do you think that the organizational infrastructure would reflect that? Probably. Taibbi was the one who found that for us. We've already covered that tweet, right? So Schellenberger is just giving us some context on this. We saw this previously and you can see percent to Republicans in Twitter. 0.27%. It's probably an accident, right? Somebody was like, oh, crap, I didn't mean to do that. Probably, they just checked the wrong box or something. Schellenberger continues. He says, in 2017, Roth tweeted that Yoel Roth, the guy who's in charge of Twitter's head trust and safety, okay, the guy who's making these policy decisions, he said that there were actual Nazis in the White House, right? That's his speech for us. Actual Nazis. In April, Roth told a colleague that his goal is, quote, to drive change in the world, which is why he decided not to become an academic. He posted this on Twitter, January 22nd, 2017, right after Trump took office, right? Trump would have taken office in early January. Yoel, the guy who's in charge at Twitter, says, yes, that person in the pink hat is clearly a bigger threat to your brand of feminism than actual Nazis in the White House, right? And he puts it in capitalizes it because I think it's sort of like a funny thing that you do, or something supposed to be. So that's Yoel, right? Now that's who's in charge. He also said this in 2022 in April. He says, yeah, academia is by far the most abusive working environment I've ever been in. Yeah, real tough. The entire system is exploitive in a ton of ways, and also not necessarily productive if your goal is to drive change in the world, which was the main reason I left. And so he wants to go out there and effectuate change. Is that the person who you should be putting in charge of applying a policy neutrally to an entire social media network? Probably not. Schellenberger continues, he says, on January 7th, Jack sent an email to employees. He said, Twitter needs to remain consistent, everybody, in our policies, including the right of users to return to Twitter after a temporary suspension. So don't punish one set of individuals inappropriately relative to others. He writes, after Roth reassures an employee that, quote, people who care about this aren't happy with where we are. After Roth reassures an employee that they're not happy. So this is what this channel looks like, the Slack messages. Yoel says to a blue person, he says, Jack's emails have been fine. Okay, so you see those two underscores. So probably bolded it or something. But ultimately, I think people want to hear from Vijaya or Dell or someone closer to the specifics of this who can reassure them that the people who care about this are thinking deeply about these problems and aren't happy with where we are. Right? So Yoel is saying that Jack is encouraging them to be uniform in their application of the policies. But Yoel doesn't want to do that, right? He wants more. He wants more change. Why should we have one standard that applies to everybody? Donald Trump is an actual Nazi in the White House. So he's got to go. And if Jack and Vijaya and other people are not hearing about this, then obviously that's going to be reflective to Yoel. He's going to feel like they're not thinking deeply about these problems. A few engineers have reached out to me directly about it. He's saying people are coming to me and I'm chatting with them, but it's so clear. They just want to know that someone is doing something about this and that it's not that we're ignoring the issues here. Right. So there's a bunch of liberals there, all donating to Democrats who are clamoring about this. We've got to do something about Trump. He's allowed to stand up here and just speak his mind. This is crazy. So Blue responds just a couple minutes later. He says, well, Yoel, I think there's also an opportunity to help people understand that while it seems obvious and simple that, quote, we should permaban his personal account, we can't afford to take that immediate action without first playing the movie out and anticipating all the other things that can happen, and then figure out the plans for those possible scenarios. If we suspend this person's account and he posts the same thing on the official government account, do we suspend that too? How far down this hole do we go? People can be forgiven for not thinking beyond the thing that's immediately in front of them. So this person's actually talking some sense. But Jack, Vijaya, Dell, you don't have the luxury of just pulling the trigger without thinking things through. We tell them repeatedly that people, quote, are on it, and people are working on it. And they're scratching their heads wondering, how hard can it be to decide if this single account is in violation? Right? So they're all sort of talking in circles. This guy is sort of massaging Yoel. He's like, well, look, you can't really, just ban him because you hate his guts. But I understand how there are a lot of people here who are telling you to just ban him because we hate his guts. Right? So it's sort of this, he's sort of, sitting on the fence on that response, which is probably exactly what Yoel wants. Yoel wants support. He wants a lot of other people to nuke Trump with him. Schellenberger continues. He says around 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, Roth, Yoel, sends his colleagues a DM with news that he's excited to share. Guess what? He says. Jack just approved repeat offender for civic integrity. Whoa. The new approach that Yoel's so excited about would create a system where 5 violations or strikes would result in a permanent suspension. A little more generous than YouTube's 3 strikes. Says, guess what? You can see him in all exclamation point, all capital letters. Sort of like somebody in middle school. Guess what? Jack just approved repeat offender for civic integrity. He says at 11:27, directional approach would be something like this. Labels, right? So he says, oh, Jack gave me the thumbs up. Here's how we're going to apply this and go after Trump. He says labels which are severe enough to result in disabled engagements incur strikes. Okay, so we're not just going to remove the tweet. If this is something that is a tweet that justifies the label, we're going to apply the label and also hit them with a strike. Strike 1 is a label only. Strike 2 is a label only. Strike 3 is a label plus a 12-hour suspension. Strike 4 is a label plus a 7-day strikeout. And then strike 5 is a permanent suspension. Boom, right? That's what they want. They want that off ramp so that they can go nuke somebody and make sure that they are gone forever and be able to justify it when they look backwards. It's exactly what they need to remove Trump. Somebody responds to that. Yoel's very excited. They respond, they say, progress, exclaims a member of his team. The exchange between Roth and his colleagues makes clear that they had been pushing Jack for greater restrictions on the speech that Twitter allows around elections. Right, they've wanted this for a long time. They're finally getting it. Schellenberger continues. He says, the colleague who's talking with Yoel wants to know if the decision means Trump can finally be banned. He goes, perfect. This is basically the only person we care about. Can we finally nuke Trump? They ask, does the incitement to violence aspect change that calculus? Like, can we just give him like 5 of those? 5 strikes because he's an insurrectionist? Ross says, no, it doesn't. He says Trump just continues to have 1 strike remaining. Okay, so he's getting very close. We can't apply it right now, the incitement to violence thing. So he's got 1 left. I'm trying to nuke him now, but we can't get to it quite yet. Progress, says the employee. Dark Brown says, does this affect our approach to Trump, who I think that we publicly said had 1 remaining strike? Can we get him now? Or does the incitement to violence aspect change that calculus? Yoel says, well, Trump just continues to have 1 strike. This is for everything else. So boom, they're putting the fences up, right? They're sort of laying the minefields around and they're waiting for Trump to step in it. Meanwhile, nobody knows anything about what the heck they're doing. This is all happening in real time. They're just making up the rules on the fly. He says that Roth's colleague asks about incitement to violence. It foreshadows what's going to be happening the following day. We're still on January 7th now, right? The so-called insurrection has already happened. On J 8th, Twitter announces the permanent suspension of Trump. Here's what they posted officially, and we'll see more of this when we get to Bari Weiss in Twitter Files 5. But she tells us, or this is what Twitter posted on January 8th. The day that they nuked a sitting president off the platform. They posted this, and of course we were here, you were there, we were all talking about how insane this was. But they said, after a close review of recent tweets from Donald Trump and the context around them, specifically how they're being received, received and interpreted. So not what he said, not what the text actually said, but specifically how they were being received and interpreted. Right? So it's not an objective test. It's sort of however the person who receives it decides it's dangerous, then it's enough for Jack and everybody at Twitter. They say we've permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. And, I don't even know if they're saying that anything that he said had already led to the incitement of violence, at least not in that paragraph. So they nuke him off the platform. On January 8th, Twitter says that its ban was based specifically on how it was received and interpreted. But in 2019, Twitter said that, quote, it did not attempt to determine all potential interpretations of the content or its intent, because that would be insane, because everybody would complain about everything. If it was up to the listener, then and every single listener could voice their interpretation of that, right? It's in the mind of the subjective listener. What is it? What are they thinking? This is dangerous. This is insurrectionary. Twitter's got to respond to all 330 million people. That's nuts. So there are different tests. They said after a close review of recent tweets by Trump and the context around them, they're nuking him. We already read that one. But previously, they said something like this in their terms. We focus on the language of reported tweets and do not attempt to determine all the potential interpretations of the content. Right? So you got to analyze the message. And we talk about these tests in the law. If it's a speaker, there's sort of 2 tests. One is whether that person objectively wants to create, like, let's say, incitement to violence. Do they objectively, as the speaker, do they have that intent? Or from the receiver, would an objectively reasonable person believe that was causing incitement? But you look at it from an objective standard, not a subjective standard. Schellenberger says, the only serious concern that we found expressed within Twitter over the implications for free speech and democracy came from a junior person in the organization. It was tucked away in a lower level Slack channel known as Site Integrity Auto. Nobody's even in there. This poor guy's in there. He's saying at 8:11 in the morning, he says, well, I guess I'll just post this in here. It's kind of quiet. He says, this might be an unpopular opinion, but one-off ad hoc decisions like this don't appear to be rooted in policy. He says, in my opinion, those are a slippery slope. and they reflect an alternatively equally dictatorial problem. This now appears to be a fiat by an online platform CEO with a global presence that can gatekeep speech for the entire world, which seems unsustainable. Yeah, that's right. This person should have been in charge, because obviously the domino effect, the cascade of what this led to, we're going to get to after they nuked Trump. But nobody else was talking about it other than that nice guy. He says that this might be an unpopular opinion, and other employees were just less perturbed. Twitter employees use the term, quote, one-off frequently in their Slack channels. Its use reveals significant employee discretion over when and whether to apply warning labels on tweets and strikes on users. So in other words, they're just sort of doing what they want as they want it. It's just a one-off, right? Well, we have a policy, but we're just going to do this as a one-off. Well, if you do the one-offs all the time, then that maybe is the policy, no? Here's a conversation. They say, I could have bounced that person with a strike. I don't see any scenario where we could decide not the bounce here. I just wanted to check if there are any concerns. Otherwise, I can bounce under RTP and we can close this one before I go. FYIs, for your information, account for review. We're trying to understand the one-off decision here, right? So that one was that's sort of outside of the normal policy. Here's another one. There's always the abuse one-off, somebody says. Just get them on abuse. Just pick that one. Or we could bounce a one-off is the option, right? So they're having conversations about how to plot to remove certain users. Schellenberger takes us back to the Twitter Files 2, which we talked about here, which was done by Bari Weiss. And the employees that Bari talked to said that we control visibility quite a bit, and we control the amplification of your content quite a bit. Normal people do not know how much we do this. One Twitter engineer told us, 2 other Twitter engineers confirmed. And this is a pretty, ongoing debate that exists in tech. People think that, Google only surfaces what the algorithm provides. And that's not true at all, right? There's a ton of people there who are picking what goes up in the search box and the one box, and they're making it with a lot of editorial control, what they feel is a better product. But they are constantly, getting in there and tinkering around with the knobs. Twitter did it too. In fact, they did it heavily. They specifically went after certain accounts and blacklisted them individually. So Schellenberger tells us that Twitter's employees recognize the difference between their own politics and Twitter's terms of service, right? So they can see the two and separate them out. But they also engage in complex interpretations of content in order to stamp out these prohibited tweets. So they say, well, I know the terms of service say this or that and the other thing. And I know that I'm a Democrat and I'm a vicious lefty. But I can separate the two out. And so I'm not going to apply my vicious lefty ideology. No, I'm going to apply the terms of service, except when they really, really, really hate what they're looking at. And then they'll just manipulate everything to satisfy the cognitive dissonance that they're having in their minds. They say this, January 7th, after the alleged insurrection. Light Blue drops in the chat. He says, hey, everybody. Hope you're doing okay after last night's insurrection and you were able to get some sleep. I couldn't. Can we, or have we already discussed blocking the hashtag stop the steal hashtag? It's furthering fake news in a dangerous way, from what I can tell. So first thing he wakes up, right, he's just petrified. Yoel says, hey there, friend. We're proactively surfacing that content for review under the civic integrity policy. And he says, and it should, _, be blocked from type ahead and trends. If you're seeing it in either of the latter two, let me know ASAP and PT can fix. Okay, so they're now they're going after entire topics. So they've gone after individuals. Now they're going after entire topics of conversation, right? So you can't even hashtag anything because it's dangerous. It's furthering fake news in a dangerous way, according to Light Blue. Yoel agrees. Now, Light Blue says, I saw the hashtag and then I did a search on it and all the content was appalling. I was just shocked. I don't care. So I don't think it's showing up elsewhere. Thank you for all you're doing. Yoel says, Well, I'll flag it to the election squad. Blue says, remember that what I find appalling and what a TOS VIO are not an exact overlap. And Yoel says, oh, they're joking. They're laughing at each other. So in other words, what this shows is that Light Blue came in there hot with an emotional violation. And then he said, well, all right, so I think this should be removed. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And then he sort of remembers, oh yeah, I'm an employee. I work here. We have policies that we're supposed to follow. So I found it appalling. Don't necessarily mean that it is a TOS violation. And so, when you pass my message along, can you, just remember that? Because maybe Stop the Steal is not a violation of the terms of service at all. In which case, why are they suspending it then? It's because Light Blue hates it. He finds it appalling and it makes him disgusted, and he couldn't even sleep the night before because he was so perturbed by the fake insurrection. Schellenberger continues. He says Roth immediately after that message DMs a colleague. He says, can we stop this hashtag Stop the Steal? He says there's also a term called Kraken. Can we get rid of that one? To blacklist these terms, and he wants them to be de-amplified. Roth's colleague objects to that, though. He says, Stop the Steal risks de-amplifying counter speech that validates the election, right? So this other person's like, are you stupid? There are people debating it right now. Like, how are you going to push back on Stop the Steal without pushing back on it? Yoel says, after the so-called insurrection, he says, hey, Light Blue, I know there's a lot going on. Do you have any objections to adding Stop the Steal and the word Kraken to the CHAQ terms list if they aren't already there? He says the daylight separating Q and the Stop the Steal stuff is now effectively zero. It's the same psycho MAGAs. Light Blue says, Kraken for sure, if it's not already there. Although I think there were problems with that, right? Wasn't it? It's like a movie or something. And Light Blue says, well, I'm too worried about the risk of amplifying counter speech. I mean, if we post Stop the Steal, then all of the people who are in the tweets pushing back against Stop the Steal, which is how it should be, right? Anytime there's an objectionable idea or an opinion, we want more speech to flesh through that issue. If you just silence everybody leaves and goes someplace else, and we never get to the conclusion of it. We never get to decide whether or not it was a good idea to lock kids up for 2 years. Don't know if that was a good idea or not. We came to the conclusion now, all a little bit too late. If we were allowed to discuss these things, maybe we could have come to more reasonable conclusions and solutions, but we couldn't. So Light Blue says, yeah, we're going to de-amplify the counter speech. And Yoel says, ach, ach is what he posted there, A-C-K. He's very upset about, he really wants to shut all these terms up. He goes, well, it's kind of a good point. He's like, yeah, I guess there's a purpose to free speech here. So Roth's colleague says, well, look, I did this. I did a quick search of Stop the Steal tweets and their counter speech. The top of them are. He says, Kraken I'm comfortable with. The top tweets are generally Q related, and I'm noticing an absence of counter speech. And Yoel says it's also super common on profile. And Light Blue says, actually, can we de-amplify accounts with Stop the Steal in the name and profile level? Those are not affiliated with counter speech. Okay, so if you just hit the hashtag, the Venn diagram's too big. It encompasses too much protected speech. But if you just go after the profiles, if you just target all of the individuals who are actually running the accounts, they're not doing the speaking, so let's just nuke the person at the account level. Let's not nuke the speech. It's censorship of an entire political contingent in America. And it's lunacy that they're talking about it, but they're doing it. It turns out that even blacklisting Kraken is less straightforward than they thought, right? So they're just going hog wild on this thing. They say Kraken, in addition to being a QAnon conspiracy theory, is also a mythical Norwegian sea monster. Also the name of a cryptocurrency exchange, and thus it was allow listed. So Yoel's just, he's just typing in the keyboard. He's like, yeah, Q, Anon, Stop the Steal, Kraken, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, right, going crazy on this. He says also, I think adding Kraken to the various bots, it may have broken something. He sends this over to Orange. He says, I know you're probably out of office, but when you're back, here's what we need. So Orange comes in. He says, oh yeah, guys, I removed Kraken the other day, FYI. It did break something. There's an app called Kraken app or something. So imagine if you're on the Kraken app and you're using Twitter to promote your app, and all of a sudden everything on your channel, on your Twitter profile just goes to zero because they blocked your entire name. We allow list that, no concerns about putting it back, but I wouldn't want to see if there's other FPs. Yeah, the brand Kraken account is also allow listed. Yeah, it's a crypto exchange. Okay, so they're having to manipulate these rules in order to get the results that they want. Shutting up Kraken as a word. Employees are now struggling with whether to punish users who share even screenshots. So they're nuking accounts. They're censoring Kayleigh McEnany. James Woods got his account censored. Now can we just share the screenshot? Users are saying, okay, they deleted Trump those tweets, right? He hasn't been nuked off the platform yet. So can we just share his tweets? I mean, they're deleting his tweets. So somebody who's an employee says, we should bounce these tweets with a strike, given that the screenshot violates the policy, right? Even the image of Trump is violating the policy. And somebody else says, yeah, but are you stupid? They're criticizing Trump, which we love. So I'm a bit hesitant with applying a strike to this user, right? So this person says, oh, F off. Oh my God. Even Twitter is saying it's inciting violence, right? Because Trump posted this tweet. He said, go home with love and in peace in his tweet. Remember this day forever. And they said this claim of election stuff is problematic. And they put the little label on there. So this user says, F off. Oh my God. So then somebody in the Twitter account, Beige, says, hi team, should we bounce people sharing Trump action tweets? And then post the comment in the Slack channel and then says, we should bounce these tweets with a strike, given the screenshot violates the policies. But they're commenting and criticizing Trump, so I'm hesitant to apply a strike, right? They love it. Now, if this person was saying, absolutely, Trump is right, the message is true in here, right? They would have nuked that person instantly. You're gone. But because this person was saying F off to Trump, they're like, well, what if a user dislikes Trump and objects to Twitter censorship? The tweet still gets deleted, but since the intention is not to deny the election, no punishing strike is applied. The conversation goes on. Says, I'm in agreement. One off, we see that phrase again. It works for commentary. Strike if a tweet is agreeing with the tweet's view. Making it up on the fly. A one-off for commenting. A strike, though, if it agrees. Somebody says, well, what if it's neutral? What if it's like sharing an opinion like, told you it violates Twitter policies? Is it a delete the tweet only? I would agree with a tweet delete only on agreeing with the policy. I would agree on delete only in instances where the content is not shared with abusive intent. Okay, now you've got Beige, who is the judge and the jury deciding what abusive intent is. Thanks, everyone. If there's anything unclear, please feel free to raise them with me, right? They're all debating on what to do as they are, creating this policy on the fly. Around noon that day, a confused senior executive in advertising sales sends a DM to Roth. The sales exec who has to sell advertising and all sorts of stuff on Twitter, he says, all right, Yoel, Jack says that, quote, we will permanently suspend Trump if our policies are violated after a 12-hour account lock. That's interesting. Can you tell me what policies is Jack talking about? Because it kind of sounds like a big deal. People want to know, I have sales to make. What policies will result in Trump being nuked? Ross says, oh, listen to this sales guy. Anything. Sales guy Blue says, hi, Yoel. I have a question about Twitter safety thread that I saw on a different channel about the president. And Jack, he sent an email out. He said, Jack says, quote, we will permanently suspend if our policies are violated after a 12-hour account lock. What policies is Jack talking about? Like, for example, is spreading misinformation a violation like his past tweets about the election? Would that do it? Or is it more about a tweet inciting violence, like because we just had J6? Which is it? I'm asking because we're getting tons of calls from clients following the Facebook and Instagram decision. Because Facebook and Instagram are also making the decision on nuking Trump and pulling his tweets down. So sales guy says, so some clarity on this would be great. Thanks. Yoel says, hey, JP salesperson, for internal awareness, right, just so we know, this would be any policy, any one of them, not just limited to elections. But before sharing anything, please coordinate with Blue on the comm side. Obviously, a ton of our interest in our position on this. Want to stay sure we are aligned. Okay, so internal. In other words, don't tell this to your clients. People are calling in, Apple's calling. Are you going to ban Trump? Because if you ban Trump, maybe we'll spend another $1 billion with you. But if you don't, maybe we leave. And then they, come to a decision on this. And Yoel says, well, this is what we're doing, but maybe don't tell anybody about this, because if they know that, maybe that changes the equation. Now it carries on. He says, what happens next is essential to understanding Twitter's justifications for banning Trump. Essential, says Michael. The sales executive says the following. Thanks, Yoel. We'll go ahead and connect with the comms team for sure on that issue, since it's our internal policy. But one last question, though, before I go. In the past, we exempted policy violation, quote, from a world leader due to a public interest value. Okay, so in other words, you weigh the policy violation against the public interest value. Technically, maybe it's a policy violation, but there's a lot of public interest because this is a national figure. And so we're going to say, all right, it's technically a policy, but because of the public interest value, we're not going to nuke you. So in this case, he says, is that going to apply to Trump? Like, he's saying all this stuff, but he is the president after all. Are we dropping the public interest stuff now, and any new violation could be a trigger? He says, for me to understand this, I just need to get this. Again, I'll check with comms about what we can talk about and share publicly, but I need to know because I've got a bunch of sales to make. Yoel, he was probably, doing whatever he did. He said, apologies for the slow reply. I've been back to back all day today. In this specific case, we're changing in this case, okay, for Trump, only for Trump in this specific case, we're changing our public interest approach for his account to say any violation would result in suspension. We aren't completely getting rid of public interest approaches for other people, though we do have work planned on revisions in the first half of 2021. So going after Trump specifically, targeting him, singling out one individual. It's not part of policy. In fact, the policy is not even applied to other people. It's only for one person. The ad executive is referring to this public interest exception rule. Here's what it says. From Twitter, they write, at present, we limit these public interest exceptions to one critical type of public interest content: tweets from elected and government officials. Given the significant public interest in knowing and being able to discuss their actions and statements, we're going to allow them to stand. But they actually had a policy. They violated their own policy. Okay, public interest content, tweets from elected officials. Donald Trump was still the president at this time, but they threw him off. Roth also pushed, he hates everybody who's a conservative or Republican. He also pushed for a suspension of Matt Gaetz, even though it doesn't quite fit anywhere. His words, not Michael's. It's kind of a test case. They're probing the rationale for nuking Trump. And this is the conversation from Slack. Light Blue says, hey, Yoel, what's the latest on the Antifa claims? Anything brewing policy-wise? C is yelling from the other room that we should just ban Gaetz. Yoel says, yeah, SP and SI are working on that. But he says it doesn't quite fit anywhere. Duh, in parentheses. He wrote duh in parentheses. Everybody is just working around the clock, colluding to try to figure this out. Just ban Gaetz. Why? Any reason? No. Don't have any policies he's violating. He's following the rules perfectly. Nevertheless, SP, which is, some safety, and some SI, some other security, they're working on it. They're trying to figure out how to do it because it doesn't fit anywhere. Light Blue says, right. Yeah, sucks. Yoel says, but I'm trying to talk to safety into treating it as incitement. So it's not clearly something. So let's relabel it something else so we can get rid of them. Yoel says, and I think we'll get over the line for removal as a conspiracy that incites violence. So he's orchestrating, creating a new violation out of thin air that doesn't exist. He said, I talked to Vijaya about this too, by the way. And she's directionally okay with it. She hates him too. So she's ready to nuke him. Around 2:30, comms executives send a message over to Yoel. to say that they don't want to make a big deal of the QAnon ban to the media because if they do, they fear that if we push this, it looks like we're trying to offer up something in place of the thing everyone wants, which is a Trump ban. So they don't even want to talk about the QAnon stuff because they know that people are going to say, that's not enough. Who's the leader of QAnon? It's Trump. And so stop banning James Woods and Kayleigh McEnany and stop all of this. They knew how effective Trump was on Twitter. They wanted him gone. So the conversation comes in from Light Blue. He sends a message to Yoel. He says, hey, Yoel, we're good either way. Look, we'll discuss. But I'm generally in the space of let's start taking action and not do a big comms push around this. We can explain why if we're asked, but worry if we push this, it looks like we're trying to offer up something in place of the thing that everyone wants. Yoel says, yep, because they all have one target in mind. They're going after one individual alone. Everything else is just a tangent. That evening, a Twitter engineer sends a DM to Roth to say, I feel a lot of debates around this. Hi, Yoel. I'm sure you're very busy right now, plotting. And my apologies if this is a distraction to your work. But I wonder if there has been discussion about reshaping the rules around official accounts. For example, at Real Donald Trump. He even includes the link to him. And other accounts. Or an unverified account. I feel a lot of debates around exceptions stem from the fact that Trump's account is not technically different from anybody else's. And yet it's treated differently due to his personal status without the corresponding Twitter rules to clarify the responsibilities that should come with that status. Okay, so Light Blue is just a big whiner who's essentially saying, I mean, why are we treating him differently than anybody else? I mean, he's saying the same opinions as anybody else. And, so what if he's the president? I mean, nobody should get special privileges on our account, on our platform here. And if Trump gets special privileges, then we should have specific rules for him, and just very upset. Okay, so this person's having like a meltdown at Twitter. Wants to do something about this and singles out Trump specifically. Hey, Yoel, can you please help us? Roth responds. He hints at how Twitter would justify deviating from its policy. So Yoel's trying to thread the needle. He knows that they can't get rid of Trump because the policies are what they are. And if they change them out of the, if they suddenly just flip a switch, it looks like they're making the change to target Trump, which of course they were. But they didn't want anybody to know that. So he says this. Okay, Blue, I think you're spot on. He's an insurrectionist. But let me put a different spin on it for you. Policy is just one part of the system of how Twitter works. Oh, so he's explaining it like a child. He says there are different things that you can change when you want to affect different behaviors. Policy, and he knows this guy just had a meltdown, right? That paragraph was like a broken person, clearly. So he's like actually being a good manager. And he's like, all right, I know you have these little meltdowns. I have them too. Let me explain how this works. Policy and enforcement are one. The product is another. Partnerships and outreach are another, etc. And all of that is situated in a bigger system, the world, which influences how everything else operates in practice. So when you change one part of the system, you necessarily have to adapt the rest. And I think we ran into the world changing faster than we were able to either adapt the product or the policy. But we can and should do both. Not directly, as he carries on. Schellenberger says the evening of January 6th, that same junior employee who expressed an unpopular opinion about ad hoc decisions, the guy who was defending free speech, he says, this is kind of a big deal. If we do this, this is going to kind of cause a big ruckus. He says he makes a conversation about ad hoc decisions. They don't appear to be rooted in policy. He speaks up one last time before the end of the day. And we read that comment from him. He next says that earlier the day, he said the following. He said, look, Twitter censors. My concern is specifically surrounding the unarticulated logic of the decision by Facebook. That's the space that feels with the idea of conspiracy theory, that all social media heads and internet moguls at every layer sit around like kings, casually deciding what people can and cannot say. And it's unhelpful to the internet ecosystem as a whole. Again, this is in my humble opinion only. And this dude is absolutely right. Shout out to Light Blue, hopefully still employed Twitter employee. Because this is exactly right. Yeah, it feels like that, right? And it was exactly like that. Every single one of these kings who run the kingdom and treat the rest of us like little peasants. Our opinions are irrelevant. They decide what is truth and what is not. They own the Washington Post. They owned Twitter. They own Facebook. They own Google. They own YouTube. They own it all. And they get to just not actually openly censor you, but they just get to twist the knobs behind the scene. It's ruining the internet ecosystem. And this guy's exactly right. So he spoke up, and he notes later in the day, he says, and Will Oremus noticed that inconsistency too. He linked to an old article at 1-0 where Facebook chucked its own rule book to ban Trump. Right? Everybody's breaking their own rules. Will Oremus, who is on Twitter, writes for the Washington Post. He says the underlying problem is that the dominant platforms have always been loath to own up to their subjectivity. No, because they don't want to admit it. They want to fake like they're objective and independent, but they're not. Because it highlights the extraordinary, unfettered power they wield over the global public square, right? If they admit it, then other people will know it. And it places the responsibility for that power on their old shoulders. He says that Facebook's suspension of Trump now puts Twitter in an awkward position. If Trump does indeed return to Twitter, the pressure on Twitter will ramp up to find a pretext on which to ban him as well. And that's the end of it from Michael Shellenberger. Now, the next drop came in from Bari Weiss, and that dropped on the 12th. And so we'll go there and cover that next. But that's the big update on Twitter Files 4 from Michael Shellenberger. And that brought us all the way through the day of January 7th. And a lot of this stuff, you can just see it's open and naked censorship of Donald Trump. And they are concocting plans and responding to the public pressure to remove him from the internet. All that took place on January 7th. And so that was a large part brought to us by Michael Shellenberger and Mr. L. Woodland. And that covered Yoel Roth, who we see here. Now we're going to talk about the next Twitter Files drop, which is Twitter Files 5. But before we get there, my friends, let's talk about our friends over at 4Patriots, because as you know, a food shortage could be coming. Even in the United States, experts have written about this as recently as July. We've got drought, inflation, new policies. These are pushing America's food supply to its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4Patriots survival food kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years, super survival food, hand-packed right here in family-owned facilities in the United States, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they stack easily, they're sturdy, and they have different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. All you need to do, add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including this beautiful 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on anything over $97. They're called 4Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. And so you can go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert to get 10% off your order and start building your stockpile today.